Jim Lynn here. Welcome to episode 7 of Mr. Lynn's Workshop. In this episode we'll be using these tools, especially the number 71 router plane and the number 140 skew block plane, to cut these rebates in the ends of the wing spars to take the doubler plates. So get your brew and let's go. One of the first things we had to do is a wee bit more marking. You can see the line at the top and the line at the bottom of the screen there. They mark the boundaries of the shallow rebate that we're going to be cutting, but the router plane won't span that far, so to give it some support we've put two intermediate tram lines, as we're calling them, and what we'll do is we'll route out between those lines and then we'll come back and use the skew block plane to take away the tram lines. So we need to secure the end of the spar as tightly as we can. So here I'm using the router plane itself as a spacer to get some clamping blocks as close as I can. This will provide security for the section that we're working on. So I'm using the square just to check that there's any bow or cup. There was a slight amount. You're always going to get that with any kind of wood. It doesn't really affect the router plane operation. In this scene we're using the marking gauge to mark the edges of the board. We've got it set quite shallow to about 1.6 millimeters, which is slightly less than the thickness of the ply that we're going to be using as the doublers. Again, taking a shallow cut with each pass. Don't try and do it all in the same cut, you can risk splitting. So the next thing to do is to mark out the edges of the sections that we're going to be ploughing out with the router plane. I'm using a freshly sharpened marking gauge here with a square, with the flat side of the blade against the blade of the square, so the bevel side is on the waste side. What this does is it stops the wood splitting as we're routing across the grain. You can easily get a split that can travel very long distances. This stops that from happening and gives us nice clean edges when we're finished. In this scene we had, we should have done this before we put the clamping blocks on, but we didn't. But it's a way you can, a method you can use to, if you are restricted in space and you have to do some square lines, you can see the notch between the blade and the stock. That takes the tip of the knife in there. It allows you to turn the square around and mark off in that direction. It's very effective, something worth bearing in mind. Right, so now we can begin. So the first thing to do, obviously, to set the depth of cut is not going to be very much. And the way I like to do it is to back off the depth adjuster and then firmly hold the router base onto the wood and turn the depth adjuster until the blade is compressing into the wood, and that gives me about 0.5 millimeter of cut or so, tightening up the locking screw to make sure nothing slips. That's the last thing we want. And then you just go at it, and you can see here there's a kind of a rotating and pushing motion at the same time, almost like peeling the wood back off the wood. Also note here that I'm not going all the way through past the other edge, the far edge. If I did that, it can split off, and it can actually split off below the line that you've carefully marked on the other side, a line you don't want to go down below. So I'm just stopping shy of about 10 to 15 millimeters from the edge to avoid that spelching, as it's called. Also, as I get towards the knifed line that I'm right up against here, you can see that the knife line has done its job. There's no splitting into the tram line, which we're using to support the sole of the router plane, and it cleans off very nicely. So now we've moved on to the centre section. You can clearly see how the base of the router plane is well supported by the tram lines we've put in. And also you can see how the router kind of rides over the splinters themselves, and of course that will lift the blade up, so you'll have less depth of cut. But that doesn't really matter. All we're doing is roughing out at the minute. There's another 2 depths of cut to go, as it were, and the final one will have very tiny splinters. and you'll get a smooth finish after that.
Yeah, I think it's a better solution, isn't it?
Yeah. We'll do this and finish up then.
Sorry, with this piece this side.
Yeah.
Shall we call it a day with this one?
Yeah.
I think that would be a good idea. You know, when you got to quit, it's when you knock it.
Yeah, always quit when I'm knackered.
Sorry?
Always quit. No matter how much I want to go on.
Before you're completely knackered.
Yeah.
I know what it's like because I don't, and then I just end up buggering stuff up.
Yeah, no, you start something and then you get into massive problems and then you run out of time and you've got to leave it.
Yeah. I think we're pacing this quite well.
Well, considering the tolerances with us.
Yeah. The tolerances are very fine. I mean, 0.4mm is, and that's giving yourself the craft, isn't it?
Yeah. So now we're setting the final depth of cut for the final pass on the 3 sections, firmly holding the router base down onto the wood whilst I turn the depth adjuster. And now I'm just sticking the corner into that marking gauge line to see if it's close enough to it. We're trying to get the base of the router blade just to slide into the base of that marking gauge line, and that's at our perfect depth. Remember, we are making a wing spar and there's some tight tolerances specified, and so we don't want to go too low. Equally well, we don't want to go too high either. The tolerances are, I think, plus 2-3mm, but minus 0, so we can't go too low.
That looks quite coarse.
Quite close.
Yeah, do you think that's a coarse cut?
Yeah, try this one.
Yeah, that's quite a lot. That looks
No,
like
that's
coarse.
deeper.
Yeah.
Okay, we've finished with the router plane now, so we can move on to the Lie Nielsen No. 140 Skew Block Plane. This is a plane that's specifically designed for going across the grain. The blade has an angle on it, it's 18 degrees, and it's quite a shallow grind angle as well. I think it is less than 25 degrees, although it might actually be 25 degrees. I haven't measured it yet. And the fact that it's skewed or angled means it slices across the grain more than just pushing itself into the wood, which gives a very nice finish. Now I'm working this edge from left hand edge in towards the centre for the simple reason that the board is slightly cupped. So in other words, the centre of the board is deeper than the outer edges. So I'm going to work both tram lines from this left hand edge towards the centre, then I'll go round to the other side and work the other edge towards the centre. I'm just checking the lateral adjustment of the blade in the mouth of the plane there. I want the blade edge to be parallel to the sides of the mouth, so that the edges don't dig into the wood and make tracks, which are also called tram lines sometimes, or just tracks. Just keep adjusting your plane as you go along, just to make sure everything's still working the way you want it to. I've come round to the other side to work from the right hand edge towards the centre. If you look at the technique here, I don't want to go fully across the board, so I'm coming in by about 50mm and lifting the plane off, and this makes sure that I don't go across the other side and ruin what I've already done. So now I'm readjusting the blade for a coarser cut, in other words deeper, and I'm starting my cut slightly in from the right hand edge and lifting just before the left hand edge. and this will have the effect of taking that last little bit of tram line out of the centre of the board. And so, having finished this rebate, Anthony's just using a little piece of the aero ply, the 1.6mm ply we're going to be using as a doubler plate, just to check for fit. And we're happy with that, nice smooth finish. So it's thumbs up from me, and that's us done. In episode 8 we'll be sharpening these 3 blades. That's the Japanese marking knife, and the Lie Nielsen Skew Block Plane blade, and the number 71 router plane blade. Well, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Mr. Lynn's Workshop.